Welcome to Buddhism Seeds, a place where every story is a gentle breath for the soul. In a world full of noise, there are things that can only be heard in silence. Meditation doesn't speak loudly, yet it carries messages that move deeply. For thousands of years, the Buddha's teaching has whispered just one truth, that peace does not come from control, but from the ability to surrender to the flow of life. The stories you are about to hear are not doctrines to memorize nor commandments to follow. They are simply doors slowly opening, inviting you to step into a world that feels lighter, deeper, and more real. A place that does not ask you to prove yourself, to strive, or to become anything other than what you already are. Before we begin, you may close your eyes for a moment. Feel your breath. Feel your feet touching the ground. You don't need to try to be still, just be here. Everything else will settle on its own. As you listen, don't search for advice. Don't analyze. Just let each story move through you, like the wind passing through branches, like water seeping into the earth. Every image, every symbol, every moment in these stories is a mirror, not for you to judge yourself, but to recognize yourself beneath the dust that has long been forgotten. Perhaps you carry questions without answers. Perhaps you are weary from trying too hard. What you are about to hear will not solve everything, but it may gently touch the places within you that ache with a quiet kind of tenderness. Because life at its deepest level doesn't need to do anything to heal. It only needs to be seen, to be held in stillness, to be met with full presence. The stories shared on Buddhism Seeds are for you, the one journeying through deeper layers of living, the one who needs no applause, the one who only seeks a place within to remember you have never lost your wholeness. Take a slow, deep breath. Soften your shoulders, quiet your heart, and let this seed of stillness take root in the deepest part of you. Let's begin gently, not to go anywhere, but to come home. On the path of practice, perhaps all of us have at some point carried a quiet question in our hearts. Why do I still suffer, even when I do the right thing? Why do I try so hard to stay steady, yet life keeps shaking me? It was a late autumn afternoon. Fine rain, thin as smoke, silently veiled the mountains behind the monastery. The air was soaked in moisture and silence. Only the soft patter of rain on the thatched roof and the cold ground remained. The old wooden gate creaked open, releasing a faint groan like a weary sigh of time itself. A young traveler stepped inside his cloak, drenched his steps unhurried, but his eyes carried a storm without a name. Not from the distance he had walked, but from what was breaking inside him. He was invited to sit by the hearth. A cup of hot tea was poured, the scent of herbs rising gently in the early winter chill. For a long while he said nothing. Then he bowed deeply, his voice low but trembling. I've tried so hard, in my work, in my practice, in the way I live. But the harder I try, the more exhausted I feel. Everything I hold on to eventually slips away like smoke. Sometimes I blame myself, thinking if only I were stronger, tougher, maybe things wouldn't have fallen apart. Where did I go wrong, Master? There was no answer right away, only a gentle silence between them. Then the monk pointed toward the garden behind the temple. Outside, the evening wind was moving through the old bamboo grove, hundreds of leaves swaying all at once. None resisted the wind. They simply bent soft yet unbroken. No words were spoken. But the young man saw the answer. It didn't come from theory, but from a simple movement of nature. Perhaps in that moment, he understood. There are times in life when strength is not what keeps things together, but the ability to yield at the right time, to breathe, to accept, to release what is dissolved, so that what remains is himself whole and light like a bamboo branch in the wind. The next morning, when dew still clung to the branches and the first sunlight touched the monastery's garden, the monk and the traveler walked slowly along the soft earth path. Each step made a faint rustle, as if nature were whispering something ancient and timely. They stopped by a fallen oak tree. Its leaves were still green, but the trunk had been torn down by the storm. Thick roots jutted from the soil, the earth torn open, showing raw, brutal fractures. No resistance, only exposure. The monk did not look at the oak. He pointed instead to the right, where the bamboo grove still stood, tall, slender, unbroken, as though no storm had ever passed. Only a few drops of water remained on the leaves, glistening in the sun. "Do you see it?" The traveler nodded silently, his eyes fixed as if seeing for the first time. The oak broke. The bamboo did not. Why? A pause long enough for the question to sink deep. Then the monk said, "The oak broke because it did not know how to bow. The bamboo lives because it knows how to bend. Which one do you think is stronger?" No answer was needed. The question carried its own reply. They continued down the small slope leading into the forest. The smell of wet soil grew stronger. On the muddy path, a large pine branch had fallen, blocking the way. But just beneath it, surprisingly, a small tuft of wild grass still lived, covered in mud, pressed under the heavy branch, yet intact, not broken, not dead, just soft. The monk bent down and gently lifted the grass from the mud. Drops from the broken pine branch fell, touching the leaves like a quiet blessing. When the wind rises, what is rigid will break. What is soft will live. He looked at the young man. Softness is not weakness. It's knowing when to stand and when to bow. It's understanding that resisting is not always the way of wisdom. The wind rose once more. The bamboo grove bowed. The wild grass, soaked but green, swayed gently. And the mighty oak, once proud and unyielding, now lay still, becoming soil for new life to grow. On their way back, they passed a small stream. The water trickled softly, weaving through moss-covered stones, not rushing, not forceful, yet undeniably alive. The monk stopped, leaned down, and picked up a small pebble from the stream. He placed it gently in the young traveler's hand. "This stone did not become smooth overnight," he said. "It was shaped by water, not by force, but by patience. The water did not break it, nor shatter it. It simply passed over it, day after day, month after month." The young man looked at the pebble in his palm. Cold, smooth, light. It seemed once sharp, once resistant, once defiant, but now only roundness and quiet remained. The monk spoke softly. "Many think they are strong when they fight, when they resist life change and the uncontrollable. But in Zen you learn this. Strength is not found in conquering, but in surviving with a heart that remains unshaken." They walked along the stream until they reached an old stone step, covered in moss, soft as an old blanket. Silence filled the air, broken only by the faint sound of wind through the trees. The monk met the young man's eyes. "When you cling to everything, peace cannot stay. Like a stiff leaf that tears in the wind, but the leaf that welcomes the wind can fly. The traveler lowered his gaze. The pebble rested quietly in his hand, a lesson that needed no more words. That night he asked to stay at the monastery. He sat silently by the bamboo grove behind the temple, under the faint moonlight rising from behind the mountains. The wind passed through the bamboo, bending them down, then lifting them again, graceful, never resisting. The scene was serene beyond words. No human voices, only nature whispering something the mind could never name. He looked at the moon, then closed his eyes. And in that moment, not by effort, something within him began to settle. No more images of old arguments. No more memories of what he couldn't hold on to. No more need to be right to cling to prove. Only breath. And the sound of the wind in the bamboo. He remembered the days he fought against every change, straining to keep things from breaking, only to break himself first. Now sitting in this silence where no one demanded him to become anything, where nothing needed to be understood, he realized what he had long been searching for was never a teaching. The bamboo's rustling did not preach, but it seemed to say, stop struggling. Bow not to surrender, but to remain. Soften not because you are weak, but because it's the only way not to break when the storm comes. At dawn, when the sun rose behind the mountains, he packed his things and prepared to leave. Before crossing the gate, he bowed deeply to the monk, not to thank him for advice, but to thank him for his presence, silent, yet enough to lift a quiet weight from his heart. And so he left, carrying nothing but lacking nothing. That winter, another great storm swept through the mountains behind the monastery. Somewhere far away, the young man, no longer so young, heard the news and simply smiled. The wind outside no longer shook his heart, because within him he had learned how to bow, no longer resisting, no longer fighting. When storms came, he simply leaned as the bamboo once taught him long ago. And because of that, he lived. Lighter, softer, not weaker, but deeper. Yet not everyone has the chance to learn from a storm. Some, after losing their way for a while, believe they have failed. They blame themselves for no longer shining, for not being as steady as before. But they do not see that the light has never left them. Only the shadow of doubt, control, and fear of being left behind has hidden the very light that keeps shining within. If you are in a lost season of your life, remember this: the forest is still there, the bamboo still grows, and the light has never gone out. All you need is to pause, take a deep breath, and listen to the wind. Perhaps it is teaching you how to live again. One misty morning, the temple courtyard was covered with fallen leaves. Cool, damp air quietly drifted through each bamboo stalk and over the old mossy bricks, heavy with the color of time. The whole garden seemed to be breathing softly, holding its stillness before the sun rose. Under the wooden eaves, a young novice sat curled up. His thin robe was slightly damp, its hem covering his knees. He held a sutra he hadn't yet finished studying, but his eyes were not on the text. They wandered toward the misty courtyard, where a faint ray of sunlight was trying to pierce through the thick morning clouds. The Zen master walked by silently. He stopped, observed the novice for a moment, then quietly sat down beside him. No questions, no words, only both of them looking toward the courtyard, where a few glimmers of light shimmered on the wet moss like threads of silver. The novice lifted his head, not in expectation, not seeking teaching, but softly asked like a leaf falling onto still water, "Master, is it because I lack good karma that I cannot practice well?" The master remained silent, neither denying nor agreeing. He simply asked gently, like the wind brushing the surface of a pond, "And why do you think so?" The novice's hands tightened around the sutra. His eyes lowered. His voice trembled slightly, but was honest. "Because I still get angry. I still think about the past. I still want to be recognized, to prove something, and I'm afraid of being judged. I don't feel pure enough to continue. My mind feels dark." Silence filled the air. The wind stirred the bamboo grove. The last drops of dew fell to the stone courtyard and vanished upon touching the ground. The sun had not yet risen fully, but its light was already threading through corners of the garden, casting a warm hue across the soft green moss. The master did not look at the novice. He gazed straight ahead into the hazy distance. "Do you see the sun today?" The novice hesitated, then whispered, "Not clearly. It's too foggy." The master nodded lightly. But has the sun disappeared?" The novice was silent. The master pointed toward the faint beams glimmering at the far end of the courtyard. "The shadow cannot make the sun vanish. It only blocks our view. When the mind is clouded, we think the light has left, but the light never disappears. It's only that we're not standing where we can see it." From his sleeve, the master pulled out a small mirror. Its surface was old, a little dim from dew and dust. He picked up a leaf with droplets of water on it and gently wiped the mirror before handing it to the novice. In the reflection, the novice saw himself hair damp, with mist, face tired yet whole. "Is the mirror broken?" the master asked. The novice shook his head softly. "No, it's just fogged." The master nodded. "So is your mind. It's not broken. It's only covered by dust, the dust of self-blame, of comparison, of words left unspoken. Wipe it, and you'll see again. No need for a new mirror. No need to replace anything." A faint light flickered in the novice's eyes. Not a grand change, but a real one. Like a small breeze rippling the still surface of a pond. He held the mirror close to his chest, as if keeping something precious. And in the silence that lingered beneath the temple eaves for the first time in many days, he felt he could continue. Not because he was pure, but because he now knew the light had never left him. The next day, when the sky cleared, the master and the novice walked up the hill behind the temple. The narrow path was blanketed with white reeds swaying in the morning wind. The sound of the breeze through the grass was like someone whispering an ancient truth. The master walked slowly, letting the novice lead. He gave no instructions, offered no guidance. At mid-hill, he stopped and pointed toward the horizon. "Close your eyes. Feel the wind brushing against your face. Don't think, just feel." The novice stood still. One hand hung loosely by his robe, the other gently held his prayer beads. His breathing softened, his shoulders relaxed, and in that fragile moment, he felt something unnamed, the wind touching his forehead, like an invisible hand of kindness, not preaching, not judging, only present. The master asked softly, like the wind itself, "Did the wind tell you that you were wrong?" "No, master." "Did the sun ask if your practice was correct?" "No." The master nodded. "Then why do you keep asking yourself that all day long?" The novice lowered his head. His voice grew small. "Because I'm afraid I'm not worthy of this path." The master looked out toward the valley below and asked, "Do you think a stream must be perfectly clear to flow? Or that a cloud must be pure white to drift?" Then he turned back his gaze, deep but gentle. "No, they only need to be true to their nature and not resist their own movement." The wind rose again, not strong but enough to make the reeds around them rustle softly, as if the earth itself agreed. That afternoon on their way back, neither spoke. But as they passed the lotus pond behind the temple, the novice stopped. Among the withered leaves bending downward in dryness, a small lotus sprout had emerged, green, fragile, yet upright, not yet blooming, not seeking attention. Simply there, the master said nothing. Because some lessons do not arrive in words, they only need someone still enough to see and to recognize themselves within. Everyone has moments when they think they are no longer good enough, no longer worthy, or no longer diligent. Those weary moments make you believe the inner light has gone out. But like the sun, that light has never vanished. It's only been dimmed like a mirror covered by a thin layer of dust. The question is not whether you still have light, but whether you dare to wipe away the dust of doubt from your heart. If you are walking through foggy days when everything inside feels blurred, tangled, uncertain, remember this. The shadow you see is the clearest proof that light is still present. Without light, there would be no shadow, so you don't need to fight the darkness. You only need to turn gently toward the source of light, not through strain or effort, not by proving anything, but through the smallest gestures, a deep breath, a soft letting go of what no longer needs to be held, a single moment of forgiving yourself. The light is always there. You only need to be gentle enough to look back. In the years that followed, the novice continued his practice not to become pure by some ideal, but to live honestly with whatever was moving inside him. Some days, his mind was clear as a freshly polished mirror. Everything flowed with ease. His heart felt light. Other days were murky, confused, anxious as mist. He no longer blamed himself for those days, because now he knew the light had never left him, even when he couldn't see it. Remembering that truth each day helped him keep walking, unafraid of stumbling, unconcerned with perfection, just sincere. And if you listening now still carry questions like, am I enough? Am I doing something wrong? Do I deserve this path? Then know this, you are enough. As long as you still wish to return toward the light, as long as you do not betray your own heart, you don't need to be perfect to be loved, nor prove yourself to be accepted, because sometimes what can truly save you is not a new teaching but a very old reminder you have never been left behind. And just as a mirror only needs a gentle hand to be cleaned, the heart too needs to be touched with kindness. Yet not everyone realizes that some losses are life's way of pulling us free from an old net. If you've ever been rejected, lost an opportunity, or believed that was meant to be mine, then keep walking with the Master into the next story. A story for those who once thought loss was an ending, but later discovered it was a beginning. At dawn by the sea, the sky had yet to brighten fully, but the water already shimmered with a silver-gray glow. The morning waves rose and fell softly, rhythmically, pushing foam onto the sand and drawing it back again like the breath of the ocean, slow, deep, unhurried. On the cold, damp shore, an old fisherman sat in silence, his calloused hands mending a torn fishing net from the night before. His face carried the marks of a long life, but in his eyes lingered something heavy, something still not released. From a distance, a Zen master approached. He said nothing, asked nothing. He simply sat down beside the man, also looking out toward the sea. The ocean wind swept past them, salty, cold, and full of memory. After a while, the fisherman spoke, his voice dry. Last night the net tore, the fish escaped. The master did not reply. He only gazed at the water. The waves were not rough, but steady enough to drown what had not yet been let go. How long has it been since your net last tore? The master asked softly. Almost 10 years. Then perhaps it was time for it to rest. The fisherman lowered his head. A sigh rose from deep within his chest, heavier than the words he'd spoken. This time I lost a big catch. There were so many fish, the net was full. I thought I had a good season. The master said nothing. He bent down, picked up a small pebble, and tossed it lightly into the sea. Ripples spread outward, touched the edge of the waves, then faded. A simple gesture, but enough to pause the storm of thought in the fisherman's mind. Then the master spoke quietly, but his words sank deep. Sometimes a net breaks, not because it is weak, but because it is no longer meant to hold what you're trying to keep. The fisherman looked up, puzzled. But if I had kept the net intact this morning, I would have been full of fish. The master turned to him, meeting his eyes, or full of regret. The fisherman froze, unsure what to say. At that moment, the master reached into his sleeve and handed him a small wooden box. Inside was a fish dead. Its skin was dull gray and its fins tinged with an unusual red. The fisherman recognized it immediately. It was a poisonous species, known to cause illness if not handled properly. This morning, the master said someone in the village told your son that at least 3 of these fish were caught in your net last night. If they had been sold, no one knows what might have happened. The fisherman fell silent, not just from shock, but because something deeper was stirring within him. The sea breeze blew again, scattering a few silver hairs across his forehead. He didn't bother to brush them away. The master spoke only once more, slowly, firmly, like a seed pressing into the earth. Not every loss is misfortune. Sometimes what tears is what saves you from what you cannot yet see. The fisherman said nothing, but his eyes softened like the sea when the tide recedes, revealing the sand beneath. And in that brief moment, he understood. It wasn't the torn net that ruined his morning. It was the torn net itself that had spared him from something unseen, like life. It often takes something falling from your grasp to realize you've just avoided something immeasurable. The wind kept blowing, but this time it didn't press against his chest, it invited him. Let the net go when it has done its part. The next morning, the fisherman went to the shore earlier than usual. On his shoulder rested a new net, its fibers still smelling of dry hemp untouched by salt water. But unlike before, he was not eager, not expectant. He simply walked quietly to the shore, sat by his old wooden boat, and looked out at the open sea where the waves rose and fell as they had yesterday, years before, and would again tomorrow. He sat for a long time before casting his net, not to wait for the right moment, but to listen, not to the sea's sound, but to something smaller inside the faint stir of what still needed to be released. And when he finally lowered the net slowly, carefully, it was not just a tool sinking into water, but a part of his worry being untangled, a piece of the past being let go. No more rushing, no more forcing. He simply released the way one learns to trust again, quietly, patiently, without demand. The sea received it. The waves lapped gently, and the sunlight, though still pale, drew a thin line of light across the net. Soft, subtle, enough. By evening, there weren't many fish. Only a few small ones shimmered in the basket, their scales reflecting the last golden light. But the fisherman felt no disappointment. He sat at the boat's edge, needle in hand, sewing slowly along a small tear, not out of regret, but care. Each stitch seemed to mend something unseen inside him. No anger, no blame, only tenderness, like learning again how to treat oneself kindly after many collisions. The Zen master passed by, hands clasped behind his back, silent. The fisherman looked up, smiled gently, and said, "The net didn't tear this time, but if it ever does again, I won't resent it." A sentence not of strength but of peace, like the evening wind brushing an old wound without pain. The master nodded slightly, eyes turned toward the setting sun, melting into the sea. The breeze passed no longer sharp with salt, but gentle, as if the sky itself understood. Not everything needs to be healed at once. Sometimes simply not resenting anymore is where healing begins. People often ask, why must we experience loss before understanding anything? Perhaps because when our hands are still gripping tightly, we think only of holding on. Only when they are empty do we learn how to place things down lightly without force. Loss is not always an ending. Sometimes it is life's way of pausing us to make us listen, to help us look deeply at what is quietly changing within. Some things leave not because we are unlucky, but because they no longer belong to the person we are becoming. Some breaks that seem like misfortune are gateways to growth, and some things we call loss are in truth protection. Life rarely explains, but it always shows through outcomes. And if you are still enough to look back, you'll see the best things are not always what we managed to keep, but what made us softer, lighter, and able to move forward without resistance. If you've ever blamed yourself for losing something, a person, a relationship, an opportunity, a dream, pause for a moment. Don't rush to label it bad luck. Perhaps what you call a torn net was life protecting you from what wasn't yet whole enough to walk beside you. And perhaps what you mourned for not keeping, if you had kept it, would have brought a deeper kind of pain. Not everything lost is truly gone. Some things leave not to take away, but to make room for what is truly yours. And if today your hands feel empty, good. Only when they are no longer clutching the old do they have space to lay down what's been heavy for too long. And perhaps that very space is where the light will enter next. The Zen master often taught, not everything that slips from your hand is a loss. Sometimes it's taken at just the right moment to keep you intact. The fisherman never forgot those words from the day his net tore. He continued to go out to sea each morning as always. But now, when he cast his net, he no longer measured by how many fish he caught, but by how much peace he kept. Whenever the net grew heavy, he didn't think of profit, but of what was being held and what was being sifted out. Not just fish, but thoughts, intentions, and the way he entered and left each day. Perhaps that is why, in time, he became the one the whole village trusted to choose the fish offered in the great ceremonies. Not because his net was the strongest, but because his heart was clear. Because he saw not only what the net caught, but also what could not be seen. The current, the wind, and the rightness of timing. People said he was no longer just a fisherman, but a man who had learned to keep what was good amid everything that had once been lost. And if you are holding a torn net, don't rush to mend it out of fear of empty hands. Watch instead what is being released from you. Perhaps that very tear is life's way of saying you are ready for a different way of being. And just as the old net once strained under poisonous fish, a full cup can no longer receive. Sometimes letting go is the only way to make room for what is good to enter. One cool early morning in the courtyard of an old temple with a lotus pond and a bamboo garden behind the main hall, a young novice came to ask for guidance with sincere devotion. He carried a thick notebook filled with dense writing and a large book with worn corners, something he said he had already read 3 times before coming. His robe still smelled new, but his posture was serious. When offered tea, he bowed deeply, his voice confident yet respectful. "Master, I have read all the basic treatises. I have memorized many sutra passages and clearly understand impermanence-dependent origination and the 4 foundations of mindfulness. I have come here to study higher meditation. Please show me the shortest path." Sitting opposite him, the Zen master did not answer right away. He quietly poured tea. The simple clay teapot steamed softly like morning mist. The sound of water touching the cup was calm and steady. But when the cup was full, the master kept pouring. The tea overflowed, dripping onto the table, spreading into dark stains, and finally falling to the stone floor. The novice, a bit uneasy, whispered, "Master, it's overflowing." The master remained calm. "Yes, I know." "Then why don't you stop?" The master's gaze was as gentle as dawn wind, neither reproachful nor amused. "For the same reason I haven't stopped, because you still have no space to receive more." The novice fell silent. The master set down the pot. The soft scent of tea drifted through the air, mingling with the damp smell of grass after the night dew. He looked at the cup, then said, "When a cup is full, even if what we pour in is the purest lotus fragrance or the freshest spring water, it will still spill out." In the same way, when your mind is already filled with ideas of right and wrong, good and bad, should and shouldn't, then even truth and wisdom will have no place to land. The novice lowered his head. His once proud face softened. A few drops of tea soaked his robe, leaving faint wet marks like a quiet metaphor for his first lesson. A light breeze passed through the bamboo garden. The stalks swayed gently. The lotus pond rippled slightly. No more words were spoken. But somehow the novice understood. Meditation does not begin with learning more, but with knowing how to stop to empty oneself. Only in that emptiness can the real enter, not through words, but through direct experience. The next day, the master led him on a climb up the hill behind the temple. It wasn't high, but the narrow path wound steeply through reeds and damp stones, still covered with morning dew. Before setting off, the novice carried a large backpack filled with books, notebooks, maps, and what he called essential materials for spiritual study. At first, his steps were steady, but after a few turns, he began to breathe heavily. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His back was soaked. Even so, he forced a firm voice. "I'm fine, master, just a little heavy." The master said nothing. He stopped on a flat rock overlooking the misty valley below and pointed outward. "What do you see?" The novice squinted into the distance. The valley was veiled in a thin fog. Everything below appeared faint. Trees, the path. It's too hazy to see clearly. Do you think it's because of the fog? Yes, perhaps. The master nodded but did not look down again. He pointed instead at the heavy pack on the novice's back. Sometimes it's not the fog that clouds our view, but the weight we carry that blinds us. The novice stood still. The wind blew through his sweat-damp hair. The master continued slowly and clearly. You don't climb a mountain by bringing a whole library. You don't go deep by carrying every concept. Whoever wishes to reach the summit must leave behind what doesn't serve the climb. The novice bowed his head. For the first time, his bright eyes softened, not with the hunger to know, but with the first glimpse of what had been blocking his own sight. Perhaps that was when he realized the inner journey does not begin by collecting more, but by learning to let go, to travel lighter and truer. That evening, back at the monastery, he quietly removed his backpack. No haste, no sound. In the simple meditation room, the late sunlight slanted through the wooden window frame, casting the shadow of bamboo leaves onto the old brick floor. He opened his bag and took things out one by one. The books were smoothed and neatly stacked in the corner. The thick notebook filled with notes was placed on top, no longer with excitement, but with calm acceptance. Then he sat down, hands resting on his knees, eyes gently closed. No writing, no reading. For the first time since his arrival, he simply sat, doing nothing, not trying to understand, not trying to meditate, just letting the breath move like the wind outside. The master walked by the veranda. He said nothing, but his eyes paused briefly like an invisible nod, a silent acknowledgement. Perhaps that was when real learning began, not through addition, but through subtraction. Not from more answers, but from silence deep enough for the questions to dissolve on their own. Someone once asked, "If I've already learned much and understood deeply, must I still empty myself?" The master would reply, "Not because what you knew was wrong, but because the new needs space to arrive. Wisdom does not come to pile up, but to renew the current of life. Like a garden, if you don't prune the dry branches, the green shoots cannot grow. Not everything you've learned is useless, but not everything needs to be carried to the end. In Zen, one does not seek more, but moves toward less attachment, less striving, less filling, less carrying. And in that less, a clarity arises that could never appear while holding too much. If your heart has become too full of teachings, theories, expectations, or ideas of right and wrong, success and failure, enough and not enough, then perhaps it's time to pause. Not to erase everything, but to release a little. A cup is not wrong for being full, but to receive new water, it must first be emptied. So too with the mind. It doesn't need perfection, only a small space enough for light to enter, enough for the breath to deepen, enough for you to see yourself again. And sometimes that emptiness is not a lack, but an opening. A still space where you can hear your own voice, uncovered by the echoes of everything you once believed to be true. And if you are climbing a mountain in your work, your practice, your relationships, and feel too weary to see your direction, perhaps what you need is not to try harder, but to remove what is weighing you down. Like a climber, no one reaches the peak carrying their whole house. Often the essential things you think you must bring are what keep you from seeing the beauty along the path, and sometimes from ever reaching the summit. You don't need more steps, just lighter ones. You don't need more, just right. And sometimes right means letting go. From that day on, the novice did not stop learning, but his pace slowed. He no longer rushed to fill his mind with everything at once. Not because he knew less, but because he began to see deeper meaning in what seemed simple. A familiar sutra reread now sounded different. A single deep breath now revealed more. He no longer filled every page with notes. He simply sat longer in the meditation hall, breathing evenly, and each morning he would pick up fallen leaves in the courtyard, not out of duty, but presence. People said he had changed, quieter, more reserved, less talkative than the energetic novice who first arrived. But in truth, he hadn't gained anything new. He had only lost less haste, less striving, less need to be right, to understand, to be recognized, and in that less, something ancient quietly returned the stillness he had once lost among the pages. He didn't learn less, he learned deeper through full presence. And you listening to this story, perhaps not to gain anything new, but to pause and ask yourself, am I carrying too much? Is there something I've held so tightly that I've forgotten? I'm tired. An old belief, an outdated expectation, an ideal that once inspired but now weighs me down. We often think that to live meaningfully, we must always move forward, learn more, do more, understand more. But in Zen, meaning sometimes comes from what you dare to release. Not because it's wrong, but because it's time to be light again. Not every cloud needs to carry rain. Some only need to float. Not every journey needs more steps. Some only need a pause. If today you can set something down, give yourself that chance. It doesn't have to be grand. Just one deeper breath. One act of forgiveness. One moment of not straining to know more. And maybe then, you'll begin to see what's always been there, the quiet completeness of the present moment itself. On the mountain peak behind the monastery during the change of seasons, the clouds often arrived early. Some mornings before the sky fully brightened, the entire slope seemed draped in a vast pale white silk veil. The cool air slipped through sleeves, and even one's breath seemed to slow down. On such days, the Zen master would often walk alone to his familiar rocky ledge beads, in hand eyes, not searching for anything, simply watching the clouds drift above, as if listening to something whispered by heaven and earth. One early autumn morning, as the wind carried the damp scent of the forest, a young novice climbed to the top. He wrapped himself in a thin robe, slightly shivering from the cold, but his eyes were full of thought. Looking up at the gray sky, he asked softly, "Master, have you ever seen a cloud return to its old shape?" The Zen master turned to look at him. The sky was just beginning to part. The first thin rays of dawn fell gently through the drifting layers of cloud. He asked in return, "Why do you want the clouds to return to their old shape?" The novice hesitated. "Yesterday I saw one that looked like a turtle, so clear, so beautiful. But today it's gone. I just thought, if only we could keep moments like that." The master didn't answer right away. He sat down on a wide, familiar rock and gestured for the novice to join him. They sat in silence for a long time. No more words, just the sound of wind brushing the forest, the stones, and their own thoughts. A large cloud drifted toward them from the east. At first, it looked like a boat. Then the wind changed direction. The cloud stretched, blurred, lost its edges, and finally merged into others, no longer distinguishable by shape or border. Then the master spoke, his voice light as the breeze. "Clouds don't fall. They only change form." The novice looked up. He said nothing, but something in his eyes had settled, as if a quiet weight had just been lifted inside. The next day, they walked together along the mountainside. Thin clouds wrapped around their steps, light as mist occasionally brushing against their cheeks, a cool, soft touch without form. The wind carried the scent of wild grass and distant birdsong. The novice walked beside the master in silence, but the phrase from yesterday echoed in his mind. Clouds don't fall. They only change form. When they reached a bend, there was a wide, slanted stone with a small pool of rainwater still resting on it. The master stopped and pointed to the still surface. "What do you see?" The novice leaned closer, peering carefully. The sky, the trees, the clouds. Are the clouds in the water, or is the water in the clouds? The question startled him. He frowned slightly. Before he could answer, the master continued, "If a breeze comes and the surface moves, what happens to the clouds in the water? They'll disappear, Then are the clouds truly gone, or is it only the image that disappears? The novice blinked. For a brief moment, light flickered behind his eyes. Something uncertain within him began to dissolve. The master looked straight into his eyes and spoke, his tone deep but not heavy. More like a reflection. There are things in life that do not truly vanish. They only change form. To not see them does not mean they are gone. And to not keep their old shape does not mean they've lost their value. The wind passed again. Ripples spread across the water. The images of cloud tree and sky shattered like pieces of a painting scattered in motion. But they both stood there watching the shifting scene, neither sad nor regretful. For sometimes what we need to learn is not how to hold on, but how to see through change without losing what is still here. In the days that followed, the novice often sat longer on the stone steps before the temple, gazing at the sky. Some days he brought paper and brush, sketching the clouds he found beautiful. A bird, a boat, or a soft streak of light. Other days he drew nothing. He simply watched and smiled as if hearing something from the sky itself. One afternoon, after a rain, small streams wound their way along the bamboo roots. As he walked by, the novice noticed a yellow leaf floating along the current, spinning gently before drifting away. He stopped watching it disappear around a bend, then quietly asked, "Master, when the leaf drifts away, does it mean it's lost?" The master watering the plants nearby didn't look up. He answered softly, "The leaf isn't lost. It's just no longer the leaf you once knew." The novice frowned, curious. "But if it's no longer a leaf, then what do we call it?" This time the master turned his eyes kind like the sky after rain. "Call it," continuing its journey. The words weren't loud, but they passed through the novice's heart like a gentle breeze. He smiled, not because he fully understood, but because he had begun to feel lighter. Under the vast sky, clouds passed by and never returned to their old shape. But whoever demanded that they must stay the same to be called clouds. A cloud is a cloud because it changes. So it is with people. No one lives a lifetime without change. Bodies shift, feelings transform, thoughts reshape, beliefs evolve with every experience. But that doesn't mean you've lost yourself simply because you no longer resemble who you once were. In the Buddha's teaching on impermanence, he said, "Nothing in this life stands still. All things pass through 4 stages: birth, existence, change, and dissolution. And strangely, it is this movement itself that is the only constant. Change is not interruption. It is flow. If you are now walking through days where you barely recognize yourself, if the person in the mirror no longer feels like you, please don't be afraid. It may not be loss. It may be transformation. Perhaps what was old hasn't disappeared. It's simply being reborn in another form. The young novice once felt the same. He once longed for the turtle-shaped cloud he saw on the mountaintop, hoping it would return. But through many days of quiet observation and wordless conversations with the sky, he realized there's no need to cling to what was once beautiful, because it's the drifting that keeps the sky forever new. From then on, he stopped trying to capture the cloud's shapes. No sketches, no notes, no names. He simply watched, sometimes smiling, sometimes closing his eyes, but always present. He looked at the clouds as if listening to a song without notes, unrepeated, unpredictable, flowing, shifting, weightless, yet vividly alive. In every moment, no need to hold just to be present. No need to capture just to see deeply. No need to name just to feel. And if today you find that you are no longer the you once were, perhaps that's a sign you're growing. Not in height, but in depth. You don't need to return to your old form to be yourself. You only need the awareness to know you are still moving, still alive, and the light has never left you no matter what shape you take. And if right now something in your life seems to be fading, a relationship, once close, a role that once defined you, a feeling that once guided you, or a part of your ego you thought you could never release, pause. Don't rush to call it loss. Don't label it over wrong or failure. Perhaps you're not losing anything, you're simply entering another form of existence. Lighter, clearer, more honest. Perhaps what you call disappearing is actually the beginning of returning to the raw aliveness of being formless, boundless, beyond control. And when you are quiet enough to stop holding everything in its old shape, you will see the essence of life has never left you. It only moves to a rhythm the mind cannot define, but the heart recognizes in the deepest silence. That is when trust begins. No need to grasp, just let go. One misty morning in the Zen garden behind the temple, Ken, a young student, came to see the master. His steps were calm, yet his eyes carried the restless tide of something that had not yet settled. He sat down and bowed deeply, hands folded. His voice was steady, but beneath it was a quiet exhaustion that words could not name. Master, I've attended many teachings, read many books, practiced meditation for years, yet I still don't feel true peace. Some days, I seem calm on the outside, but inside, it's chaos. What am I doing wrong? The Zen master did not reply. He simply smiled and poured tea. A gentle breeze passed through, and a few petals fell into the courtyard, bowing softly to the silence between them. After a while, the master stood up without a word and gestured for Ken to follow. They walked slowly through the bamboo forest behind the temple. No one spoke. Only the sound of leaves brushing footsteps on damp soil and the quiet breathing of someone waiting for an answer. Ken walked behind, uncertain. He had asked a deep question, yet the master gave no reply. But the silence of the master did not feel like avoidance. It felt as if the silence itself was the answer. They stopped beside a small stream. The water was crystal clear, weaving between moss and stone, whispering thinly, like a thread stitching stillness into time. Birds sang somewhere nearby. Sunlight began to slip through the leaves, glimmering on the surface of the water. The master sat down on a flat rock and motioned for Ken to sit beside him. No lecture, no theory. He simply closed his eyes and breathed slowly, deeply. Ken closed his eyes too, but his mind was restless. He tried to inhale deeply, then opened his eyes looking at the stream. "Master," he whispered, "do you hear anything?" The master nodded, eyes still closed. "I hear the water, the leaves, but inside me it's still noisy. Why can't I be as still as you?" The master opened his eyes and looked at him, not to answer, but to help him see himself more clearly. He pointed to the stream. "Is the stream saying anything?" Ken looked at the flowing water between the rocks. "No, master, it's just flowing." The master smiled. Once a child asked an old man, "Does the stream speak?" The old man said, "No, the stream is silent. It's only you who are noisy." Ken froze. Something like a quiet light flickered behind his eyes. The master picked up a fallen bamboo twig and gently stirred the surface of the water. Ken's reflection immediately broke apart, distorted, scattered. When you try to make the water still, the master said it only stirs more. But if you leave it alone, it becomes clear by itself. Ken watched the ripples fade, the sunlight glimmering through the mist. Everything began to brighten effortlessly. He murmured, "So, silence is also an answer." The master replied softly, "Not just an answer, the deepest one. Peace isn't what you find when everything outside is quiet. It's when the echoes inside no longer demand to be spoken. Not every question needs a response. Not every knot needs to be untied. Sometimes what you need is simply to sit by a stream beside someone who says nothing, and somehow you begin to hear yourself. And in the sounds of water, leaves, and breath, what's deepest within you also begins to flow away. No explanations, only presence." From that day on, Ken stopped asking questions. But each day he set aside a little time to sit by the stream behind the temple. Not to figure anything out, not waiting for a grand revelation. Just sitting like a drifting cloud, a falling leaf, a flowing stream. Some days he sighed softly. Some days he smiled for no reason. But strangely, whatever emotion passed through him no longer shook him as before. Everything came, then went as lightly as the breeze through bamboo leaves. Gradually, he stopped counting his sittings by the stream. He stopped searching for peace as a destination. He just sat to be present. One morning, the master walked by and saw him sitting in the same spot. The air was cool. Sunlight still carried traces of mist. Ken turned, bowed deeply, and said, "Master, I still don't know what true peace is. But I no longer feel the need to know." The master nodded gently. A leaf fell onto the stream. The water rippled, then smoothed again, as if it had never been disturbed, as if smiling. In Buddhism, there are truths that cannot be reached by thought, cannot be held by words, only realized through direct experience, the experience of stillness. But that stillness isn't the forced silence of restraint. It doesn't come from holding your breath to make the world quiet. It arises from deep within, where you stop resisting, stop seeking, and simply exist. Stillness in Zen is not about escaping sound. It's not about going somewhere remote. It's about not being swept away by sound. You still hear the bell, the traffic, your own heartbeat, but you are no longer carried by them. You remain with yourself, like a lake which doesn't lose its clarity because of rain. It simply waits until the rain stops, the dust settles, and the water clears again. So too, your mind doesn't need to become something special. It only needs to stop being disturbed. When you no longer try to be peaceful, you begin to touch a peace that is real, not because there is no noise, but because noise no longer controls you. That is lasting peace. If you've been chasing peace by learning more, reading more, practicing more, perhaps what you need now isn't more, but less. Less reacting to what you dislike, less chasing after a state you call enlightenment, less clinging to the thoughts that repeat in your mind. Just sit, just breathe, just be like the stream. Don't try to do anything. Don't try to become anyone. Don't explain anything to be understood. In the years that followed, Ken never became a famous teacher, nor wrote books or led retreats. But everyone who spent time with him would say, "And it's strange, just sitting next to Ken makes my heart feel lighter." Maybe it was because he no longer tried to teach, no longer tried to fix anyone, no longer tried to prove how far he'd come. He simply was like a stream. Cool, clear, unspoken, and sometimes that silent, complete presence itself is the most profound teaching of all. If today your heart feels restless and you're trying to quiet it by listening to another talk or reading another passage, pause for a moment. Not to take in more, but to let the inner voices dissolve into stillness. Be still, not because you've reached something, but because you finally trust enough to stop searching. In the old temple hall on a quiet morning, a young novice monk sat silently on the veranda, his trembling hands holding a broken bowl. The bowl was old but precious. It had been passed down to him by the Zen master when he first entered the monastery. Every day after meals, he would carefully wash and polish it, treating it as part of his practice. But that morning, with a single moment of carelessness, the bowl slipped from his grasp and fell onto the stone floor. The sound of its breaking was soft yet deep, like a clean cut across his heart. Now the bowl lay in his hands, a long crack running from its rim down to the base. It wasn't shattered, but the fracture was enough to make his young heart ache. He didn't know whether to hide it, throw it away, or try to repair it, not because he feared punishment, but because of a strange, quiet sorrow, as if he had just broken a part of his own reverence, a fragment of purity within his heart. The Zen master happened to pass by. He stopped when he saw the boy bowing his head, eyes full of distress. "What happened?" the master asked, his voice deep but gentle. The novice bowed lower. "Master, I broke the bowl. The one you used to use." The master bent down in silence and picked it up. Under the morning light, the crack was clearly visible, like an unhealed wound. He turned the bowl slowly in his hands, looked at it for a long while, and said, "It still keeps its form. It can be repaired, but it shouldn't be hidden." The boy lifted his head, his voice trembling. "I'm afraid it won't be as beautiful as before." The master smiled, his eyes warm, the kind of warmth that comes from one who has lived through many losses, who said a cracked bowl loses its value. He placed the bowl gently back into the boy's hands as though setting down a teaching. Some cracks don't come to ruin something, they come to teach us how to see differently. If you only look at the break, you'll feel regret. But if you look with a clear mind, you'll see that's where the light can enter. The boy looked down at the bowl again. Morning sunlight spilled across it, reflecting through the crack a thin shimmer of gold-like light. In that moment, he understood the bowl hadn't lost its beauty. It had simply taken on another, the beauty of imperfection, yet truth. The next day, the master brought the bowl to an old craftsman in the village, a man known for preserving an almost lost art of pottery repair. Not with ordinary glue, but through something special. Kintsugi, the art of mending pottery with real gold mixed with lacquer and tree resin, sealing the fracture with luminous veins of light. The craftsman received the bowl in silence. He didn't ask questions. He only examined the crack for a long while and smiled softly, the smile of someone who understood that even what is broken can have a soul. In his small workshop, filled with the scent of lacquer and aged wood, he began his delicate work. Each brush stroke, each drop of gold, each breath merging into one quiet rhythm. A week later, the bowl returned. When the master opened the box, the young novice held his breath. The crack was still there, but it was not hidden. Instead, it was traced with shining gold, soft and fluid, like a river of light flowing through old clay. The more they looked, the more wondrous it became. What had once been a wound had now become the very soul of its beauty. The master placed the bowl on the tea table. The morning light fell on it, reflecting tiny golden lines that glimmered like veins of light within the human heart. He gestured for the novice to sit. "What do you see?" he asked softly. The boy gazed at it for a long time. The bowl is still the same, but also different. Strangely, it's more beautiful than before. The master nodded, eyes calm as still water, because it no longer hides what was once broken. The boy hesitated, then asked quietly, "But why use gold?" The master smiled. "Because only light can truly mend darkness. Just like people, what once cracked can become most beautiful when healed with clarity and compassion." The boy looked again at the golden fracture. In it, he saw not just the repaired bowl, but himself. For the first time, he understood sometimes what has been broken is exactly where the light wants to enter. They sat in silence. The master poured tea. The sound of water touching the bowl rang with a new tone, deep, soft, and warm, like the whisper of something once shattered, but no longer resentful. Sunlight glowed across the glaze, dancing along the golden veins, as if the bowl itself was breathing. The master spoke quietly, each word settling deeply. In this life, everyone breaks each in their own way. Sometimes it's a relationship we once believed unbreakable. Sometimes a dream we trusted completely. And sometimes it's a part of ourselves. Something we thought was strong suddenly cracked on an ordinary day. The boy lowered his head, running a finger gently along the curve of gold. Then, how do we stop feeling broken, Master? The Master looked at him, eyes deep as a morning lake. By not trying to go back to what you were. Don't patch yourself to look as if you never broke. Let the crack itself become the place where light passes through. When you dare to face your wound and touch it with kindness, it turns into gold just like this. The boy sat quietly for a long time. Sunlight slanted across the veranda, glimmering through the fracture. He saw the golden lines like little rivers carrying the past through the pain, yet not drowned by it. And in that moment, he understood. The truest beauty is not in never breaking, but in letting the light flow through our cracks. From then on, the bowl was used in every tea ceremony. It was never hidden away. No one tried to disguise the golden veins. On the contrary, whenever someone's eyes rested upon it, the air seemed to soften. Some whispered that just looking at it made their hearts quiet, as if their fear of past hurts and brokenness had eased a little. The bowl was no longer perfect in the way people define perfection. Yet that was what made it sacred, not as an object that had been whole, but as a soul that had once broken, yet never lost itself. And the young monk, whenever he felt weary, wounded, or fragile, would look at the bowl as if looking into a mirror. He didn't see strength or sermons, only a simple truth. He had cracked. He had broken. But if he healed himself with the light of compassion, he could not only go on, he could become more beautiful because of what he had lived through. If your heart carries something, once broken, a trust that no longer feels the same, a memory you can't return to, or a piece of youth that slipped from your hands, please don't think you're ruined. Not everything that cracks is a loss. Some cracks are simply where the light wants to come in. In Buddhist teaching, beauty doesn't lie in flawless perfection. True beauty lies here. Even after pain, the heart still opens. Even after getting lost, the person still walks on. Even after breaking, life still sings its gentle song. That is the beauty of awakening. If you are quietly mending yourself today, piece by piece, gently and patiently, don't be afraid of how others may see you. Don't rush to hide the parts that once broke, because sometimes what you most want to conceal is where others find their courage. You don't have to be perfect. You only have to be honest. Let the light emerge from your own cracks. Don't erase them. Don't cover them. Don't disguise them with something new. Just be fully truthfully with your scars, your seams, and the light shining through them. The bowl is still used every day, not because a newer, prettier one couldn't replace it, but because it has become a symbol, a reminder that what once broke when healed with light can become beautiful in a way that wholeness never could. And if you are quietly mending yourself, keep going. Because every act of healing, no matter how small, is another line of gold being painted across the true shape of your soul. After 3 days of heavy rain, the small river behind the temple turned muddy and swollen. Small waves broke into foam against the rocks, carrying branches, debris, and decaying leaves. The old wooden bridge that led to the meditation hut could no longer withstand the current it broke. Large planks drifted away, while smaller pieces got stuck between boulders, trembling with each surge of rushing water. The path across was completely severed. A young novice monk stood by the riverbank, gripping his basket tightly, eyes fixed on the torrent. Every day he would cross to the other side to pick fresh tea leaves, gather dry wood, and practice walking meditation among the bamboo groves. But today, there was only the roaring of the river and a distance that could not be crossed. He looked around. No bridge, no boat, no way across. The wind swept through his thin robe, carrying dampness and unease. He exhaled deeply. The Zen master approached. He didn't ask, didn't scold. He simply stood beside the boy, looking down at the swirling water. After a while, he asked softly, "What are you waiting for?" The boy replied, his voice almost drowned by the river. "I want to cross to the other side as usual, but the rain was too heavy. I don't know how to get across now." The master said nothing at first. He looked quietly at the murky water, then up at the clouds that hadn't yet cleared. The air smelled of wet earth. A few leaves floated past. Then he spoke gently. "Sometimes what you need is not more strength to cross, but enough patience to wait." The boy turned to him surprised. "But if I just wait, what if it's too late? What if the tea spoils? What if the firewood gets soaked? What if I miss something important?" The master pointed to a leaf spinning in the current and said, "Someone once saw a beautiful leaf and jumped into the stream to catch it. The more he tried, the farther it drifted. In the end, he was swept away, while the leaf kept floating, unaware it was being chased." The boy fell silent. The master continued, "Some things, if you try to force them before the right time, only bring more trouble. Yesterday this stream was shallow. Today it's full. But tomorrow it will be clear again. The bridge will be rebuilt. Everything has its own timing. Zen does not teach you to seize every chance. It teaches you to know when to step forward and when to wait." A light breeze passed. A small bamboo branch broke off, touched the water, and drifted away gently without struggle. The master's voice followed like an echo. "Peace isn't about overcoming every obstacle. It's knowing when to stop and standing still without resistance." The boy looked at the river. After a while, he set his basket down. He didn't sigh anymore. He just looked and nodded quietly. At that moment, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a beam of light on the swirling water. The river still flowed, but it was calmer. Perhaps tomorrow it would clear again. Perhaps a new bridge would be built. But even if not, perhaps the boy would understand something deeper, that not everything must be conquered to prove one's worth. Some days simply standing still is already a journey. The next day, the water had not yet receded. The river behind the temple was still muddy and swift, as if refusing to let anyone cross. The young novice sat by the bank, holding his old basket. His eyes carried a quiet worry, not about chores, but something deeper, a sense of helplessness, as if he himself was being stopped by something beyond control. He asked sincerely, "Master, is it wrong to want to do my duties, to be on time, to live responsibly?" The master didn't answer right away. He watched the churning river, then said softly, "No, it's not wrong. But if in your heart everything must be done immediately, then even what is right can wound you. He bent down, picked up a smooth stone, and dropped it gently into the water. It made a small ripple, then vanished. When the water is muddy, the wise don't stir it to make it clear. They sit and wait. The boy said nothing. His eyes followed where the stone had sunk. The water still moved, yet something inside him had stopped. The master turned to him, meeting his gaze not sternly, not as a lecture, but with a depth like the river when it is calm. Some rivers can only be crossed when the water has gone down, and some hearts can only see clearly when they have allowed everything to settle. 3 days later, the sky cleared. The river behind the temple grew calm, clear enough to see the pebbles beneath. The gentle trickle now sounded like music. The wooden bridge had been repaired, simple but steady. The young monk crossed the bridge. For the first time in days, there was no trace of his usual haste. His steps were quick, but his heart was unhurried. Inside, something had slowed no longer. Fighting time, no longer racing himself. On the other side, he gathered a handful of fresh green tea leaves cool against his fingertips. Before he would have rushed back as if completing a task. But this time he stopped. Under an old tree where he used to rest only briefly, he sat down, quietly, not to escape, not to wait, simply because his heart was calm enough to sit. The wind brushed gently. The leaves rustled like breathing. Everything was as before, only his way of seeing had changed. And perhaps peace is not found in reaching the other shore, but in how you stand still wherever you are. If at this moment something in your life feels interrupted, a relationship that's grown distant, a plan halted midway, or a dream postponed, though you're ready, please don't assume you've gone the wrong way. Perhaps you're just standing before a river that's rising, and the best thing you can do right now is not to force your way across, but to learn how to stand still. Wait for the water to recede. Wait for the heart to settle. Wait for what is unclear to become bright again in the sunlight of tomorrow. Not everything can be solved through effort. Sometimes the more you try, the more you're swept away. The tighter you hold, the more you lose. And sometimes patience itself is the real bridge that carries you across. So if today you cannot move forward, cannot fix, cannot return, cannot begin, let that pause simply exist as it is. The water will calm in time, and you steadier, clearer will know when it's time to take the next step. In Buddhist teaching, patience is not waiting helplessly. It is a deep kind of trust, a trust that the universe has its own rhythm and that everything is unfolding in its time. Even when you cannot see it yet, you cannot force a flower to bloom before its season. No matter how much water or sunlight you give, it still needs time to grow from within. You cannot make a river still while the wind is stirring it. You may wish for peace, but if your heart is restless, you are the one who keeps the surface trembling. And you cannot find calmness if your mind still demands faster, sooner, more. Patience, therefore, is a profound agreement with life's flow. It is accepting that some things only come when you are ready to receive them. It is allowing everything to unfold, not too early, not too late. And within that patience, you begin to see what you thought was stillness was actually quiet growth. If you feel like the person who jumped into the stream to chase a drifting leaf, please stop. The leaf will float on. The current will change. The wind will move in its own way. But if you keep swimming against the flow, trying to hold on to what is no longer there, a relationship, an old dream, an earlier version of yourself, you may be the first to lose your direction. Step back onto the shore, sit down, breathe, not to control anything, not to plan, just to let the heart rest. To see that sometimes the wisest act is not doing more but stopping at the right time. Then you'll notice when the river of life quiets, what you need was never truly gone. It was simply waiting for you to be still enough to see it. In the days that followed, the young monk continued his daily tasks, picking tea, crossing the river, walking in meditation. But he was no longer haunted by the need to do everything on time, to complete every task, to follow every plan. He began to listen to the wind changing direction, the water rising and falling, and the rhythm of his own breath. He understood there are times when stopping is not delay, but wisdom. No longer too fast to prove himself, nor too slow out of fear. He walked only when it felt right, when the mind was quiet, and the heart no longer pushed by urgency. And in each step, he learned something deeper than any teaching. Sometimes the right timing doesn't come from the clock, but from awareness within. And if you are now in a moment where life feels paused, don't rush to move forward. Sit beside the river of your own life. Observe. Listen. Don't judge. Just be present with what is. When the time is right, you will know. You won't need to ask. You won't need to force. Your body will move, your intuition will open the way, because not every broken bridge needs to be fixed right away. Sometimes the real bridge is the patience you are quietly practicing each day, and within that patience, what you need will slowly appear. When you are no longer afraid to pause, you will realize something essential. The light is not only on the other side of the river, where you've always thought you must go. It may already be shining right where you sit quietly, softly, without fanfare. You just hadn't noticed before, too busy crossing, too hurried to see. And when you stop striving to move forward at all costs, that light, which was always there, begins to reveal itself, not from ahead, but from the stillness within. A young man once studied under many Zen masters. He was diligent, disciplined, lived by the precepts, and practiced meditation without interruption. On the surface, everyone believed he was walking the right path, but the deeper he practiced, the more he felt an expanding emptiness inside. It wasn't the peaceful stillness that the teachings often spoke of. It was a quiet ache, a sense that he was not enough, not deep enough, not calm enough, not bright enough to guide anyone, not even himself. Some evenings he sat silently by the temple veranda, watching the small candle flicker in front of him. Its flame never went out, but it didn't burn strong either. It trembled in the wind as if struggling to hold on to its fragile light. And inside him, Another flame did the same, wanting to blaze, yet afraid that its light was too weak, too insignificant. One day, he went to see his master. He didn't speak much, only whispered, "Master, I feel useless." The Zen master looked at him, not with pity, not with disappointment. He walked over to the tea table, opened a small wooden box, and took out an old candle. Its body leaned to one side, the wick was bent, the wax had overflowed and dried like tears. He lit it. The candle burned not bright, but steady. He asked, "What do you see?" "A candle, nearly burned out, yet it's still burning." "Yes, but weakly." The master's voice was calm, like a passing breeze. "Is it weak? Or are you demanding it shine like the sun?" The young man froze. The master continued, "Some people can't see their own worth because they keep comparing themselves to everything that glows more brightly. But even a small candle in the dark night can ease the fear of someone lost. You don't need to be the light for the whole world. You only need to be bright enough for your own next step, and sometimes that is enough." The young man bowed his head. The master's gaze rested on the flickering flame. A candle is not meant to dazzle. It only needs to keep its light from going out. Those words sank into the young man's heart like cool water. In that moment, he realized all those years he hadn't lived with light. He had lived under the pressure to shine more, to be stronger, to be big enough for others to notice. But the more he tried to blaze, the more the wind consumed him. It was his own striving that made his flame unsteady. He exhaled softly, letting go of something he had been holding too tightly, the need to be significant. And in that letting go, he saw the flame before him, still burning. Small, but enough to light a quiet evening, enough to warm a soul learning how to be gentle again. The next day, as he walked alone through the bamboo forest, his heart felt lighter. There was no pressure to realize something profound, no expectation of enlightenment. He simply walked, steady, slow, like wind moving through bamboo, touching, but not disturbing. No pushing, no forcing. On the way back, he saw an old man by a pile of damp firewood, struggling to start a fire. Smoke curled upward, but no flame would stay. The young man stopped, opened his palm. Inside, it was a small candle he had carried through his journey, never letting the wind extinguish it. He bent down and brought the flame close to the firewood. The fire caught, then burned, not large, but enough to warm. The old man smiled and asked, "Are you the one who made this fire?" The young man shook his head gently. "I didn't create it. I just kept it until someone needed it." And in that moment, he understood he didn't need to be the light of the world. He only needed not to let the light within him go out. In the Buddha's teaching, some are born to shine brightly like the sun in a clear sky, but others are born to quietly keep a flame alive like a candle in the night, silent and steadfast. Both are precious. Both are expressions of the way. Light is not something you prove. It doesn't need display or recognition to have value. True light is what you preserve through each mindful breath, each act of kindness, each moment you choose not to react when misunderstood. It is in a gentle gaze toward someone speaking harshly. It is in a quiet moment of stillness when the world outside pulls you to run. To keep your inner light alive, you don't need to be the brightest. You only need not to let it die. Don't let the winds of praise or blame blow it out. Don't let the undercurrents of fear or comparison drown it, and that alone makes you part of the light, a silent, essential part. If you feel you're not as bright as someone else, please don't compare. Each person is a flame, and every flame has its purpose. Some light the path, some bring warmth, some quietly nurture new life. None are wasted. None are lesser, just because they do not blaze. The question is not how bright you are, but whether you are keeping your flame alive. Because the flame within you, however small, is still part of the vast light of this universe. And sometimes, that small flame is exactly what someone needs in the coldest moment of their life. Keep it. Gently, honestly, steadily, just as you are. That young man never became a famous Zen master. He gave no great sermons, had no large following. He lived quietly in a small hut on a mountainside where mornings were misty and the wind moved softly through old pines. Each day he rose before dawn. He lit a single candle, not for ritual, not for others to see, but simply to keep a little light for himself, for his small room, for the warmth that slowly spread within. The candle burned until the sun grew bright enough to take its place. He never sought to do great things, but travelers who stopped by his hut all said the same thing. There's something very warm about that place. Perhaps it was because there was a flame not brilliant but never extinguished. And if today you are walking through a dark stretch of life where the light outside feels too far and inside you there's only a faint glow, please don't lose heart. Not everyone is born to be the sun. Sometimes you're meant to be a candle, small but enough to keep yourself warm, and perhaps enough to light the way for someone lost in the night. Don't measure your worth by how brightly others can see you. The world is loud, but true light doesn't need to shout to be seen. True light remains quietly burning in the human heart, even without praise, without recognition. If your flame feels weak today, it's okay. Just keep it from going out. Don't let the world's doubt blow it away. Don't let comparison, envy, or the feeling of not enough consume it. We don't have to be the light of the whole sky. We just need to keep our own flame by living slower, more truthfully, and with gratitude for the warmth we already have. That alone is already something beautiful. In a small village nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains and forests, there lived a farmer named Liang. He led a quiet life, tending his small field, caring for his chickens, his horse, and raising his only son, a young man full of vigor and dreams. No one in the village really knew Liang's past, but everyone sensed one thing clearly. He was a man of few words, slow to judge, and seemingly untouched by extremes of joy or sorrow. One day, his only horse escaped and disappeared into the forest. It was the family's most valuable possession, not just a work animal, but their greatest asset. When the neighbors heard the news, they all came to offer sympathy, lamenting his misfortune. Such bad luck. Losing a horse like that is a disaster. Lang only smiled and replied softly, "Who knows if it's good or bad?" The villagers were puzzled. It was clearly a loss. Why wasn't he upset? 3 days later, the horse returned, but not alone. It brought back 2 wild horses, strong, tall, and untamed. Now Leung had 3 horses in his stable. The whole village came to congratulate him. What great fortune, they said. Losing 1, but gaining 3, truly a blessing. Lang smiled again. Who knows if it's good or bad? This time the neighbors were bewildered. Why wasn't he delighted about such obvious luck? But they said nothing more and left shaking their heads. Lang quietly went on with his daily work, neither chasing after gain nor clinging to loss. For him, life was a stream of changes beyond anyone's control. What people call good or bad, he thought were only temporary labels born of a mind still full of craving. A few days later, Liang's son decided to ride one of the wild horses. The animal was fierce and untrained. As soon as he mounted, it reared violently and threw him to the ground. The fall broke his leg, leaving him bedridden for months. Once again, the villagers came sighing, shaking their heads full of sympathy. What misfortune, truly bad luck disguised as good. If those wild horses hadn't come, this wouldn't have happened. Liang gently set down his cup of tea, looked out toward his resting son in the sunlight, and said calmly, "Who knows if it's good or bad?" The neighbors were astonished again. To them, the tragedy was obvious. But to Liang, what was happening might not be the end, only a chapter in a story not yet complete. Weeks later, as winter approached, soldiers from the royal army came to the village. They went door to door, drafting every able-bodied young man for a new war on the frontier. No one was allowed to refuse. Families wept, fearing for their sons, and the young men trembled, knowing they might never return. Leng's son was strong, but this time he was spared his leg still in a brace, unable to walk. The soldiers passed his house and moved on. The village fell silent in grief. Those who had once laughed at Liang now only looked at him quietly with new understanding in their eyes. Liang said nothing. He simply continued plowing his field and cooking meals for his son. Now they understood what once seemed misfortune could be protection, and what appeared to be luck might lead to loss. No one asked him again, "Is it good or bad?" Because now they knew. Ling's story was simple, yet it lived on through generations, carrying a quiet, profound wisdom. In life, how often do we rush to label events as good or bad, only to realize months, years, or even decades later that we had judged too soon? A setback occurs, we call it misfortune. A success arrives, we call it luck. But the truth is, no one knows what comes next. Today's bad luck may protect us from greater harm tomorrow. Today's good fortune may plant the seed of future pain. In the Buddha's teaching, there is a principle. All phenomena arise from causes and conditions. Nothing is fixed inherently good or bad. Everything is the result of countless interwoven causes, inner and outer past and present. What happens now is part of a vast movement that the mind cannot fully see. If you are in the midst of uncertainty, don't rush to conclude. Sometimes the answer isn't found in the present. It unfolds with time as your view widens. If you are facing loss, an unexpected ending, a closed door, or a missed opportunity, remember, you may only be standing in the middle of a painting, not yet complete. When we see only a few brushstrokes, it's easy to say, "This looks wrong." But the artist doesn't say that they know beauty takes time to appear. Remember the old parable of 3 painters working on one canvas. The first painted only the background. The second added the outlines of trees. The third hadn't even started. A passerby glanced at the half-done work and scoffed, "This looks terrible." But when the painting was finished, it became a masterpiece that left viewers speechless. We often live like that impatient observer. When something doesn't go our way, we rush to declare, "I've failed. I'm unlucky. I'm not good enough." But if we can wait like Liang, we may see that what looks like an ending is just the doorway to a new beginning. In Buddhism, all things arise through conditions. Nothing stands alone. What you face now is part of a larger unfolding. What seems like misfortune today may save you from a greater loss tomorrow. And what feels like success now may not last forever. So if your path feels unclear, don't judge too soon. Like an unfinished painting, give it time. You may one day see the whole picture and smile at how wisely life took its time. Liang's wisdom wasn't in predicting the future, but in not labeling the present. He wasn't swayed by others' excitement or despair. His heart stayed still like a calm lake, receiving everything yet reacting to nothing in excess. You don't have to be a monk to learn this. Each day when something happens, instead of saying, "That's bad" or "That's lucky," pause for a breath and ask quietly, "Who knows if it's good or bad?" This question isn't meant to be answered. It's a small anchor that keeps you from drifting with judgment, that helps you stay steady in uncertainty. Because so much of life only reveals its meaning when you look back. And the moment you choose not to label too quickly, you plant the seed of wisdom, quiet, but enduring. Later, Ling's son recovered. He no longer rode horses. He built a small pottery studio by the river, working with earth, water, and fire to create forms of his own. His pots were never identical, some slightly uneven, some lopsided, some darkened by uneven flames. Yet, people loved them, not because they were perfect, but because they felt real, as if each piece carried the warmth of human hands and the story of fire and clay. One day someone asked, "Why don't you make them perfectly round like everyone else?" He smiled and said, "Perfect beauty makes people compare. But beauty with a flaw, people remember." The man didn't know that answer came from his father, from the times Lang smiled before loss, never labeling it as bad or good. And from that his son had learned what carries a mark often carries a soul. If life now feels uncertain, unfinished, don't rush to conclude. You may just be in the middle of the painting. Don't force yourself to understand everything now. Don't judge your worth or your path based on a few early strokes. Life, like a living artwork, cannot be understood by isolated colors. What you call a dead end may be the foundation for what's to come. And the shadows you fear may one day highlight the light that follows. You don't need to know what's right or wrong immediately. You just need a calm mind to observe. Then you will see everything that comes has a reason. Everything that leaves has one too. In the Buddha's teaching, everything arises through conditions. Nothing happens by chance. What you're enduring today may be the seed of tomorrow's growth, and one day, when you look back, you'll understand life never happens to you or against you. It happens for you, so you can learn something deeper. You may not see it now, but in time it will become clear. One quiet afternoon in the monastery courtyard, among the low trees whose shadows gently touched the ground, a young student sat silently beside a small branch. On that branch, a butterfly cocoon trembled ever so slightly, like a soft breath. The late sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting the cocoon's shadow onto the earth, trembling, fragile, yet full of potential life. The boy watched closely, his own breathing slowing with each delicate movement of the cocoon. Then he turned to the elder beside him and whispered, as if afraid to disturb the stillness around them, "I see the butterfly struggling to get out. Should I help it?" There was no immediate answer. Only the sound of the wind passing through the trees, a soft rustling, as if nature itself was weighing the question. The boy lowered his head and continued slower this time, almost speaking to himself. "I used to feel like that too, wanting to escape something. But the more I struggled, the more exhausted I became. I just wished someone would give me a hand." The elder kept his gaze on the cocoon. After a long pause, he replied gently, his voice as calm as a breeze. "Just watch. Don't rush to interfere." The boy fell silent, though his eyes were still filled with hesitation. A while later, the elder spoke again, still watching the cocoon. "If you help the butterfly out too soon, it will never be able to fly. The struggle is what pushes the blood into its wings. If it's rescued too easily, its wings will stay soft forever, and it will crawl, but never fly." The boy froze. He looked again at the cocoon, which now moved more vigorously. Each tiny motion seemed to sketch the outline of future wings. The elder continued slowly. "Sometimes the best thing we can do for another person is nothing. Just to be present, quietly, trusting that they'll find their own strength right in the heart of their struggle." The boy nodded softly, but his eyes had changed. No longer restless to help, but filled with respect for a process unfolding in its own time. The cocoon kept trembling, but now the boy's gaze carried a gentle faith. No need to hurry, no need to interfere. Just wait and trust. The next morning, the student returned to the same spot, his face heavy with regret. He sat down and pressed his palms together, speaking quietly, almost trembling. I couldn't stand it. I cut the cocoon a little. I just wanted to help it come out faster. But the butterfly couldn't fly. Its wings were weak, they wouldn't open. It just trembled for a while. And then it died, a long silence. His eyes could not hide the sorrow. I truly thought I was doing something good. The master did not scold him. He didn't shake his head nor rush to explain. He simply poured tea steam rising gently, and after a while he began to speak, his voice slow and distant. Long ago, a man in the forest saw a small cocoon shaking violently on a branch. The outer shell trembled as if something inside was desperately fighting to break free. Moved with pity, the man used a knife to carefully slice it open. The butterfly emerged, but instead of flying, it only quivered on the ground. Its wings remained folded soft and weak. The blood had not yet reached the tips to strengthen and expand them. It could not fly. It only lived a few more hours, then died. The man never knew that the struggle inside the cocoon was necessary. It wasn't meaningless pain, it was part of the process of becoming. That effort to break free pushes the blood through the body, giving the wings the strength to open, to harden, to soar. He paused, then added, "Humans are no different. If someone pulls us out of our pain too early, if someone endures the lesson for us, we lose the chance to grow. A person who isn't strong within, even when given freedom, still cannot fly, because they haven't learned how." The Buddha taught about suffering, not so we would escape it, but so we would look deeply into it. Because where there is suffering, there is the seed of wisdom. Pain isn't the enemy, it's the cocoon where awakening is being born. No one wants to stay long in darkness. That feeling of being confined, of not knowing when it will end, can make one feel suffocated. But if you are quiet enough, patient enough, trusting enough in the natural process of the mind, then within that darkness, a quiet transformation is taking place. Your mind is learning to let go of the old, learning to breathe in stillness, learning to grow strong from within. And one day when the time is right, you will break that shell yourself. No one will need to pull you out. And when that moment comes, flight will be effortless. A butterfly doesn't need to learn how to fly. It only needs to grow in the right way. And pain sometimes is the environment that makes that possible. Compassion without wisdom easily becomes interference, and interference can destroy the natural process someone needs to go through. There are pains no one can bear for another. There are crossroads no one can walk for someone else. It's not lack of love. True love knows when to hold a hand and when to let go, so the other can take their own steps. In Buddhism, compassion is not rescuing nor doing things on someone's behalf. It is presence walking alongside with awareness, knowing that some pain must be fully lived to be healed, that some nights must be crossed alone for the inner light to be born. To sit beside someone in silence without urging, without fixing, is sometimes the deepest form of compassion. When someone is in pain, our instinct is to make them feel normal again, get better, quickly, stay positive as if suffering were a problem to be immediately repaired. But sometimes they don't need to be pulled out of their pain. They are simply in the cocoon stage, a silent, invisible inner process that is profoundly important. At that time, the best thing we can do is not to push them forward, but to trust that they are in their own right process. They are contracting before expanding, dissolving before being reborn. We don't need to teach them anything, just to be there, like the sun, not instructing, not forcing, but shining quietly, steadily, unshaken. Because sometimes that silent, trusting presence is what gives them enough courage to continue. A week later, the student returned to the same tree. He brought no knife this time, his eyes no longer restless. He simply placed a small stone beneath a new cocoon, as if to say, "I was here once." He didn't touch it, didn't explain, didn't wish for anything to happen sooner. He just sat there for a while like a quiet friend, watching the cocoon tremble gently in the wind. No need to understand, no need to do anything. Then he stood up and walked away, not saving, not intervening, just present, light as a breath. Because sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone is to do nothing except believe that they are strong enough to grow their own wings. If you have ever loved someone deeply, there were probably moments when you grew restless, seeing them trapped in an old pain. You wanted to pull them out, to make them smile again like before. But remember, some pain isn't a burden. It's a shell, nurturing something deeper inside. You cannot fly for them. You cannot suffer in their place. You can only stay near quietly like a warm light and trust that within that dark shell a soul is growing. No need to rush. No need to explain. Just be present with a love that doesn't hurry, doesn't demand results. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can give to someone you love is your faith that they can make it through on their own. And if the one inside the cocoon is, you please don't rush yourself out just to feel like you're making progress. Don't call your quiet days useless. Don't measure your worth by visible milestones. Some growth makes no sound. Some transformations can only be felt from within when you stop comparing and stop panicking. You are not slow, you are incubating. That stillness is your condition. That pause is your preparation. No butterfly ever needed to be pulled out. Only cocoons that deserve respect to finish their silent work. And when the moment naturally comes, you will emerge not by force, but by your own gentle unfolding, soft as a flower's bloom, quiet as a seed ripening. If today you find yourself in a dark phase, don't despair. It is not the end. It is another layer of life where your soul is healing and rearranging itself in ways your mind cannot yet understand. And if someone asks you, "Have you moved on yet?" just smile and say, "Not yet. I'm still in my cocoon, and I trust I will fly when it's time." One day, as summer gently turned to autumn, the air became strangely clear and cool. White clouds drifted slowly across the deep blue sky, as if they had nowhere else to be. In that stillness, a small drop of rain began to form, hanging delicately at the edge of a cloud. it had never fallen to the ground. Since its birth, it had only known one thing, that it was a raindrop, round small, glimmering in the sunlight. And because it had never fallen, it knew nothing beyond that form. The wind began to stir. The cloud grew thinner. The drop trembled. It looked down toward the vast, boundless ocean below. To its eyes, that was the end. No more cloud, no more drop, only disappearance. It whispered to itself, "If I fall, I'll vanish. I don't want to disappear. I want to stay as I am. I want to be safe." But the wind kept blowing. The cloud kept thinning. The drop clung on, yet couldn't resist the pull of nature's flow. There was one truth it didn't yet understand. Only by falling could the drop realize it never truly disappears. It merely returns to the ocean, to the cycle, to its own essence. But at that moment, the drop didn't know. It only knew fear, as we all do, when facing something greater than ourselves, something unknown. Nearby on a branch, a yellow leaf was trembling. The wind brushed past it softly, like an invitation. The leaf felt its own fragility clearly. It had been part of a green, vibrant tree all summer. Now, with autumn arriving, it knew the time of parting was near. Yet the leaf hesitated. "If the wind takes me, I won't rest on the branch anymore. I won't belong to what I once was." That fear filled every vein, not fear of falling, but fear of not knowing what comes after. But the wind does not wait for readiness. A light gust passed, and the leaf lifted. It didn't fall straight down, as it feared. It twirled, it spun, it danced through the air, a final waltz of freedom. For the first time, the leaf was flying, not by choice, but at the right moment. It was no longer the leaf that fell. It was the leaf that danced. From afar, the trembling drop watched in silence. It said nothing, but something inside it cracked open, not in breaking, but as a small opening where faith began to enter. Maybe dissolving isn't the end. Maybe it's just another way to exist. And then came its turn. As the cloud thinned away, nothing held it anymore. The drop let go. At first it thought it was falling. Then it realized it was moving. Not being pulled, but being guided. And when it touched the vast ocean below, it dissolved. But strangely, it didn't disappear. It didn't lose its form into nothingness. It simply returned to where it belonged. No longer a separate drop, but not lost either. It had become the ocean, a union, a silent return, an ending that was really a doorway into something larger. And from deep within the water, a quiet realization arose. I was never lost. In Buddhism, there is a profound truth. What we think has disappeared is often what has returned to its greater nature. When a drop of water falls from the cloud, people think it's gone, but it has gone home to the ocean. When a leaf leaves its branch, people think it's over, but that might be the moment it begins to dance. And when you let go of your old forms, your roles, your names, your stories, you do not disappear. You return to something deeper, a self beyond labels, beyond boundaries. We suffer because we cling to forms. Form of success, form of identity, form of control. But forms always change. Essence does not. When you cling to form, you suffer with it. When you release it, you expand lighter, freer, truer. Letting go is not giving up. It is returning to yourself undefined and whole. And that is liberation, like the raindrop. When it was still clinging to the cloud, it thought it was a separate being, small, fragile, afraid. It believed that falling meant the end. But when it surrendered, fell through fear, and touched the ocean, it did not end. It merged. It returned. And in that moment, it was no longer just a drop. It became part of the waves, the wind, the rhythm of the sea. And strangely, in losing its form, it found its freedom. Because it realized it had never been alone, and never truly disappeared. It only needed to let go and trust. Then dissolving would no longer be the end, but the union with something greater. And with that, fear faded away. A student once asked, "How do I stop fearing the loss of myself?" The deepest answer is not in how to keep it, but in understanding that what we call myself has never been a fixed thing. You are not your name, your role, your achievements, or the image others have of you. Those are temporary garments, they come and go. You fear losing them only because you think without them you won't exist. But in Buddhist teaching, all phenomena are impermanent and without a fixed self. When you see that you are part of a greater stream of life, you understand there is nothing to keep, because there is nothing to lose. Only transformation, like a drop entering the river, not disappearing, but returning to the larger whole. So there's no need to strain to preserve yourself. Just live sincerely and move gently with each change. Then you will no longer fear loss. You will simply be growing. Like the wind, it holds onto nothing yet. Wherever it passes, there is movement. Leaves tremble. Doors sway. Clouds drift. The wind doesn't need to remain in one shape to be real. It only needs to pass softly. And that is its freedom. We are the same. We don't need to cling to a fixed I. We don't need to stay forever in one role, one title, or one success to prove our worth. What matters is being fully present in each moment. When you are here, be truly here. When it's time to move on, release gently, because holding on brings suffering. Letting go brings freedom. If you find yourself in a season of falling, where your position, identity, beliefs, or relationships seem to be slipping away, remember the raindrop. Falling doesn't mean losing. Falling can mean returning. Someone once said, "I lost everything." But one day, standing before the ocean, watching waves crash and dissolve, then rise again, they understood loss is not an ending, but an invitation. An invitation to return to what can never be lost, the essence deep within. And if someone asks, "Who are you?" try answering with silence, like the ocean, vast, deep, needing no name, because the truth cannot be spoken. It can only be known when you stop needing to define it. An old Zen saying goes, "I am not the wave. I am the water." The wave rises and falls, but the water remains. And then you will see all the things you once clung to just to prove I still exist are no longer necessary. You don't need to prove. You don't need to stand out. You don't need to stay the same, because you are already living within what can never disappear. So if today you feel unseen, no longer successful, without clear roles or direction, breathe slowly. Perhaps you are not falling. Perhaps you are returning. Early autumn morning. A thin layer of mist covered the mossy stones, soft and pale like breath. Golden leaves drifted down, touching the stream's surface before floating away, carrying the faint sound of time itself. By the stream, a young person sat quietly, eyes following the ripples spreading from a fallen leaf. Beneath the water, smooth, round pebbles lay still, their beauty born not from polish, but from years of being shaped by the flowing current. In that still moment, a question arose in the young one's heart, silent but heavy. Why must people suffer so much? The answer came, not from anyone, but from the scene itself, from the sound of water, the whisper of wind, the touch of mist on skin. Because there are still parts of us that need to be revealed. Just as stones must be shaped by water to become smooth, the human heart must go through wounds to uncover its truest light. Perhaps pain doesn't come to harm us, but to reveal the purity we already carry. Long ago, the stones beneath this stream had sharp, jagged edges, each edge like an unhealed wound, enough to cut skin, enough to tear the young moss. But time didn't stop. The water kept flowing, not fiercely, not violently, but quietly, patiently, gently passing through. Every touch of water was a moment of refinement. Every contact, a transformation. Gradually, those rough stones grew round, and strangely, they also grew brighter, as though the light now shone from within, not because the stones became weak, but because the water never tired. Not through force, but through constancy, it achieved what violence never could, and not because the stones lost their worth, but because their outer shell that once seemed essential for protection was no longer needed. So it is with people. Wounds are not always loss. Sometimes they are the way for the outer layers to be worn away so that what is real can begin to appear. Pain works like that too. It doesn't come to punish you, but to smooth away what has become hard, heavy, unnecessary. Not to take away who you are, but to give you the chance to reveal a self more gentle, more steady, more true. Some pains don't arrive like storms. They come quietly, like the steady trickle of a stream. They don't break you suddenly. They slowly wear down the sharpness of ego, the hidden grip of control, the unspoken need for approval. Each ache is like water touching stone. It doesn't shatter you, but softens you. And one day, when enough of the outer crust is worn away, you will touch something thin, but very real inside yourself. A softer part, lighter, more alive, able to feel, to breathe, to see life with gentler eyes. Then, you no longer need to prove anything, because you just as you are don't need to be perfect. And that wound, that's where the light enters. Many fear being hurt. They fear losing the image they built, fear no longer being as strong as others once saw them or as they once believed. But they forget true strength doesn't come from an untouched shell. It comes from the clear core inside when you no longer fear being scratched. A sharp stone can hurt others and ends up being avoided. But a stone softened by years of water, people want to hold it. Place it on an altar, keep it in their pocket, or simply look at it in silence. Not because it shines, but because it no longer wounds. It feels safe. It feels real. When you are misunderstood, rejected, or left in unexplained silence, breathe slowly, gently. Then remember the image of the stone in the stream. Ask yourself, what in me is being worn away, and what is slowly being revealed? Perhaps what's being taken away is the need for recognition, the reflex to react, the attachment to being right, strong, or okay. And what remains is a person who no longer needs to win, no longer needs to impress, but simply needs to be honest. No one passes through life without strong currents. Some fight against them, clinging to old edges, and they bleed. The tighter they hold, the deeper it hurts. Others learn to release not themselves, but what no longer needs to be held. They let the water do its work, to smooth what has grown too rigid, too closed. Those people do not collapse. They begin to shine not brightly, but warmly. Not flawless, but genuine. And because of that, others trust them not because they're right, but because they no longer need to be. Their presence is enough. When your heart no longer strains to protect an old image, when your hands no longer clutch what's already gone, when your soul allows time to do its quiet work without force, without hurry, that's when light begins to rise from within. Not a blinding light that demands attention, but a soft one like moonlight on a weathered stone, smooth and still. If someday you think you've grown weaker, more sensitive, less able to handle life, know this: you are not weaker. You are becoming softer. Soft enough not to hurt yourself. Soft enough not to hurt others. You haven't lost your strength. You've gained something deeper: understanding. Understanding that not everyone who hurts you is cruel. They are simply part of the water, and you are just a stone still being shaped. Each collision smooths you a little more. Each misunderstanding another ripple of water, and time will take care of the rest. A stone with sharp edges lies alone, but once softened by water, people bring it home, place it in temples and gardens in their palms. Not because it's precious, but because it carries something universal, a symbol of endurance without turning to stone, a symbol of radiance born without noise, a symbol of beauty shaped by silence, by friction, by patient stillness. So if today all you can do is sit quietly, saying nothing, doing nothing, that is already enough. Just breathe. Let the water flow through your heart. Each breath is a stream. Each letting go is another stroke that smooths the stone. Don't fear that you're breaking. You're not breaking. You're being polished. At the far end of the monastery courtyard stood an old bell beneath an ancient Bodhi tree. Its surface was colored by time, fine cracks running across it like silver threads sewing through memory. New visitors often passed by without noticing it. The bell had not rung for many years, but those who had stayed long would bow gently before it every morning. Not because of its sound, but because of something deeper. a silent presence, a wordless reminder, as if the bell did not need to ring in order to be a bell. Its completeness was in its being, not its function. One day, a young man arrived at the temple. He stopped, pointed at the cracked bell, and asked, "Why keep it? Why not replace it with a new one?" The gardener smiled softly, still tending to the soil around the flowers, "Because it has never stopped being a bell." That short reply opened a door. Not everything that loses its outer function becomes useless. Some things only need to be there. And that alone reminds us to return to ourselves. Like that old bell, silent, yet never without the deep resonance of existence, there are values that do not depend on usefulness. There are presences that do not need to do anything to be meaningful. And there are roles that even in stillness help others pause, bow, and remember they are alive. Once this bell used to ring every morning meditation. Its sound did not just echo through space, it touched hearts. People said each chime awakened something within. When its sound carried over the hills and fields, farmers would pause mid-harvest. Those lost in worldly noise would stop, if only for a breath. Then, one stormy day, lightning struck the great tree beside the monastery. A falling branch hit the bell. From then on, it no longer rang as before. Each attempt to strike it brought only fractured tones, like a song that had forgotten its words. So people stopped ringing it, but no one removed it. It remained like a witness, a silence deeper than sound itself. The gardener still paused and bowed every morning. Travelers still stopped before it even without being told, because sometimes what touches the heart is not a clear sound, but a true presence. That bell no longer rings, yet it has never been silent. It still stands there, quiet, still, complete. And strangely, since the day it ceased to make sound, more people have begun sitting before it, longer, calmer, not to hear, but to see, to feel, and to find themselves reflected in its silence. One gloomy afternoon, a young man knelt before the cracked bell. His fingers touched the time-worn fractures. His voice trembled. "I'm like this bell. I once rang. I was needed, sought after. But now, no one calls my name. I feel useless." An old monk nearby stayed silent for a moment, then smiled. "But you are still here." The young man looked up, doubtful. "Here. For what if no one listens?" The elder pointed to the bell. "Each morning people still bow before it, not because it still rings, but because it is the bell." Those words echoed without needing a chime, and yet they resonated deeply. The young man lowered his head. Because some things do not need sound to be recognized, do not need function to be valued, do not need to ring anymore to remain sacred in someone's heart. Presence sometimes is the greatest gift you can give, not because of what you do, but because of what you are. There are times in life when you are no longer the center of light, no longer the source of inspiration, no longer applauded or invited to speak. Your opinions are not asked, for your presence seems unnoticed. But remember, that does not make you less. It does not erase your worth. No one can take away your essence simply because you no longer make noise. You are still the bell, even when you do not ring. And this silence carries a deeper resonance than sound ever could. Like a mountain that moves people without speaking. Like the cracked bell in the temple courtyard, still enough to make all who pass bow their heads. Some truths don't need proof to be real. They only need presence. They only need honesty. They only need you not to lose yourself, even in silence. In Buddhism, the bell symbolizes awakening. But not every bell must produce a sound. Some bells ring without anyone striking them. They vibrate in a peaceful gaze, a deep breath, or a quiet posture amid the rush of life. A truly awakened one doesn't need to speak to be heard. They don't try to influence, yet their presence calms others like a bell that rings in the wind without metal ever being touched. When your mind is still, you no longer need to make sound because you are the sound. A chime of stillness. A resonance without words, yet reaching the deepest part of the heart. And then people stop hearing with their ears and start listening with their hearts. Many ask, how do I know I still have value when no one praises or needs me? The answer lies in the cracked bell in the courtyard, no longer ringing, no longer polished, no longer the center of ceremony, yet still there, simple, silent, and every morning someone still pauses to bow, not because it's useful, but because it reminds them of something beyond all function. Value does not lie in sound, but in calm, authentic presence. Those who have walked through enough noise will always seek a place without sound to finally be still. If today you feel unseen, unheard, or unchosen, pause for a moment. Breathe deeply. Perhaps your silence itself is what the world most needs right now. No one is ever healed by grand advice. People are healed by the peaceful energy of someone who has truly sat down and is at ease. No one calms another by saying, "Be calm." But a peaceful heart spreads like incense, unspoken yet pervasive. Perhaps you are already the bell and simply don't know it. A bell that doesn't need sound yet still moves hearts. A presence that needs no proof yet helps others see themselves. Perhaps you have entered the level of meditation that no longer uses words but presence, no longer rings the outer bell but resonates the inner one. And someday when no one understands you, when no one applauds or calls you to the light, do not think you have disappeared. Perhaps only then, when you stop trying to be seen, you will truly begin to see. The bell does not grieve for not ringing. It only grieves if it forgets that it is still the bell. If today you find yourself in a quiet space where you need not prove anything, where you don't need to be understood in order to love, stay there a little longer. That place is rare, not because it's far, but because it's so silent that most people fear it. If you are willing to stay, truly, stay with the stillness inside you, you will see that very place, wordless, soundless, can become a bell of awakening for someone lost. And if you sit long enough doing nothing but breathing quietly, someone may pass by, and without knowing why, pause near you, not because you spoke, but because something in you helped them return to themselves, a tenderness without name, a light not blinding yet warm enough. That is the bell not ringing yet resonating. This journey has carried you through many symbols, the broken bowl for what remains valuable even after loss, the raindrop for dissolution, and return the candle for the steady light within fragility, the butterfly for the pain that precedes transformation, the bell for presence beyond words. Each is not just a story, but a mirror reflecting the places within you that seek comfort, understanding, or simply rest. Now that you have sat quietly through all these layers, I invite you to return no longer as the raindrop, the stone, or the bell, but simply as yourself, breathing still. Stillness is not a lack. Stillness can be the most complete form of presence in a modern world full of noise, full of things to do, of demands to succeed and say something meaningful. One who can sit quietly, who can simply be, is already a rare bell of awakening, a soundless chime that still moves hearts. You do not need to shine to have worth. You do not need to become someone, achieve something, or fulfill an ideal image. You only need to stay real, gentle, and whole in the stillness of your being. And that sometimes is the greatest gift you can offer the world. Every loss is not an ending. Every moment when you feel left behind, not progressing or not chosen, may simply be a resting point, a pause to listen again to your own heartbeat before walking on deeper and lighter. If tonight, after all this, you feel seen, then these stories have fulfilled their purpose. If something within you has softened, that is why I have written line by line inviting you home. And if you wish to continue walking with these stories, these soft whispers that help you breathe deeper, trust clearer, and let go of what no longer needs to be held, please subscribe to Buddhism Seeds, like, and leave a comment. I will read and cherish each one. Every small action is a seed you plant, not only for the channel, but for yourself, and for those who need a moment of quiet amid too much noise. And if you are about to fall asleep, let your mind drift like a leaf on water. No resistance, no grasping. Tonight, you don't need to finish anything. You don't need to fix anything. Just lie down gently and breathe. Let your breath lead you home, and let the universe in its own silence sing you into peaceful rest. May your night be calm. See you in the next story, where awakening begins, not with a sound, but with a silence deep enough to be heard.